outside wall for public art professionally done?
So we've had one application received and three points of interest, meaning I hope we get 3 more applicants because 3 others have expressed interest, but I have not received their formal application.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you, Jessica. So I'd like to step back for a moment since Jennifer joined us. Welcome, Jennifer, to the commission.
Thank you.
And if you have could you just tell us a little bit about yourself, please?
Yes, I'm an Idaho native. I grew up in southeast Idaho, went to school in northern Idaho, and now live in southwestern Idaho. But I've been fortunate to travel a lot too, and so I have a global vision. And music and dance are my 2 areas of specialty.
Great, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on then to workshop public art report. Discussion of the agenda and the outline. Is that Meredith?
Sure. Jessica, do you want to say anything to transition? Or I know you already said a few words, or do you want me to just jump right in?
Well, I don't need to take up too much. Yeah, I just want to really thank Meredith for all of the great work that she's done. She has been chasing people down and sounds like having some great conversations. And I'm excited. I think that she has some really useful results and thoughts. And I'm just bummed that we couldn't bring her here in person and show her around and everyone get to meet her in person. So Meredith, maybe you'll have to you should come to Boise and Meridian anyway someday just for fun, and we'll show you around.
Fantastic. I was very, I was sad that we didn't get to make that trip this summer. So thank you for the invitation. So I know there are a few new people that are now part of this group. So I'll just sort of reintroduce myself. My name is Meredith McKinley. I am a public art consultant. I have a company called Via Partnership. We started about 20 years ago. We're based in St. Louis, Missouri, and now my partner is in New York. Although I am not in St. Louis right now, I am in northern Michigan. So for a couple of weeks to get out of that awful Midwestern heat and humidity. So, but I'm really glad to be here. I was looking forward to coming to Meridian to get out of the heat and humidity. So we'll maybe next summer. So we have a full agenda. Let me know, did the slide change? Okay, good. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. We've already everybody's already introduced themselves. You know, as I said, via partnership, we work with communities all over the country. We do public art planning, master plans, as well as area plans. And then we also work with communities to help them commission public art. And so what we like to say, and I truly believe this, is that we have a lot of experience on the ground working with communities. So we've got a good sense of what works and doesn't work, not just from a sort of theoretical or best practices point of view, but from sort of working with artists and working with communities every day. So wanted to just very quickly recap the survey results, just to remind you all of the work that we did on the survey, and then who we interviewed. But I want to spend the bulk of our time today talking about a draft or proposed vision, goals, and strategies for public art for Meridian, and then some implementation recommendations. So that's sort of more under the hood, you know, how do we actually get projects done that we can be excited about. Hopefully you all have had a chance to look at the survey that we did in the spring. We received just about 300 responses to that survey. And there were sort of, again, about a half a dozen or so key takeaways. One was that people, at least the people who filled that survey out, were very interested in the role that public art could play in creating something that is unique and that reflects the community's identity. People were also very interested in artwork that's memorable, but also just very highly recognizable, this sort of iconic pieces. I think, again, which really ties into identity as well as not just reflecting identity, but also potentially helping build the identity of the community. There was a strong positive reaction to artwork that could enhance the appearance of infrastructure or those kinds of functional elements that are part of public spaces, picnic shelters and benches and tree grates and things like that. People also responded very positively to artwork that is interactive, that's playful, that comes to life when people are sort of in interaction with the work. There were two types of places that people also very strongly responded to. 75% of the respondents to that survey said that they were interested in seeing art in Meridian's parks, and 67% were interested in seeing art in the downtown area. So again, those are important things to keep in mind as we talk. And then there was a lot of interest in supporting local artists and sort of working with local and regional artists, which we'll spend some time talking about later. Since the survey was completed, Audrey and I have been talking with a lot of folks involved with sort of the implementation side of public art, as well as part of the vision and sort of the opportunities. So these are the folks that we've met and spoken to over the past couple of months. They've been very generous with their time and with their information. I mean, and this really, I think, constitutes to a lot of the folks that you've already been partnering with to do successful public art projects, and we'll probably continue to partner with in the future to get projects done. Okay, so where are we? So we sort of took all of that information. We also spent a lot of time looking at different plans and previous plans that have been done in the community, and all of those conversations, and tried to synthesize that into a couple of concise ideas. So I always feel like a vision is a really important place to start. And we talked about this, I think, on the last call. But to me, a vision statement tells you or answers the question, what is the impact that we want public art to have in our community? So after we've successfully commissioned all this art, how has it changed things? How has it made the community and the people's lives different? So we took a lot of those ideas and we brought them together, and there's really sort of three key ideas here. So public art in Meridian builds and strengthens the city's unique identity in the region, develops Meridian as a creative city, and makes its public spaces more active and attractive. So again, those are sort of three important ideas. Identity was one, again, that came up over and over and over again in the survey and in the conversations, the interviews that we had. This idea of making Meridian as a whole a more memorable place and distinct from its neighbors, but also this idea of identity as it relates to different neighborhoods, different parks, so that I think there was a sort of notion that, especially as Meridian is developing, that different parts of the city are all starting to look alike. So how can art be a part of a strategy to make different parts of the city more distinct from each other? The second big idea is this idea about a creative city. And I think this ties into identity kind of nicely as well, because that creative city could be part of that larger identity, that Meridian is a place where art and culture is appreciated and can be enjoyed and supported. And then finally, that idea that public art can make the city more attractive, more active, create public spaces that people want to be in and inhabit. So I'm going to pause there for a second, because the sort of strategies build on this, and I want to see if there are any questions about this before we move on. And don't forget to unmute, because I always do. Any questions? Any thoughts as you sort of read these words? And Does this feel like it? Yeah, Tom?
Yes, I'm intrigued by the percentage of your survey with people wanting to see art, or they were drawn to art in the downtown area. What did your survey reveal, if anything, about the emerging and new developing areas that have a natural, that clearly we have a natural barrier because of let's see, we don't say the in I know I-84. Any sort of clarity that you could give with people who are now south of 84?
No, and unfortunately we weren't that sort of precise or specific. And I would say that the results, and if you don't have a copy of the survey report, we'll be sure to get you one, but that the results actually were a little uneven when it came to downtown. When we asked to rank places where people would be interested in seeing public art, downtown came in at number 2. But then when we asked, I think the question was specifically about should public art help build or strengthen the identity of downtown, that got a lower ranking. So I don't know if it had to do with the way that the question was worded, or if it, I mean, these aren't statistically significant surveys, if it was just that other choices were more appealing. But I think there's still, at least as far as downtown is concerned, there's still some threads that you're going to need to pull on to really understand within the context of downtown what it is that people feel that public art can do in those spaces. And unfortunately we weren't able to get that specific necessarily in other parts of town.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I'll keep going, and then as other questions, and I can't see all of your faces, so if I miss calling on you, just speak up, because there might be more questions as we go. So what I did is I took each of these sort of ideas, unique identity, creative city, and active attractive, and started to think about within the context of Meridian, what are some strategies that you all could be using to actually help make this happen? So I have a couple of thoughts on this for each one of these. And again, these are in the handout, I think, that was in your packet. So in terms of the unique identity, I mean, one of the things that you could very clearly do is have artists focus on ideas and stories that are part of what make Meridian unique. I mean, again, people I think were very interested in Meridian's history, its agricultural heritage, but are there other stories, other ideas that are specific to Meridian? Is it the sort of history of irrigation in the community? Is it the natural environment? Is it somebody who made an important contribution in the state who happens to be from Meridian? Or these are the kinds of stories that I think artists are always sort of interested in mining when they're creating public art, and can be sort of you can organize specific opportunities to really sort of bring this out in the work. Another idea would just be to focus on places that people strongly identify with Meridian. Again, the parks, people felt very strongly that the parks were important places in the community. They were places where people would take visitors to show them what Meridian was all about. So continuing that, but downtown and other places might also sort of be the kinds of places you really want to focus on in terms of supporting and enhancing identity. Develop projects that convey a district's character. So again, thinking not just about the sort of citywide identity, but that sort of neighborhood scale identity, and looking at projects that do that as well. And you see, I mean, again, this is a wonderful example of a functional project on the left, where an artist, Mark Riegelman, designed planters that are unique. You can't buy anything quite like that out of a catalog. The project on the right is actually in Richardson, Texas, and it's a piece, again, that's sort of about the unique identity of the Heights Park neighborhood. It's a long story, but it has to do with the history of a beloved play structure, as well as a sort of tech history of Richardson. I think that there's this notion too, with both the unique identity and the idea of the creative city, of a couple of projects, and maybe this isn't the specific, you know, the sole focus of the program, but getting to a place where you can do a couple of projects that welcome people to your community and let them know that they're in a place that's artistic and that values arts and culture. So these sort of, you know, I picked two projects that were these sort of very sort of highway scale projects. They both happen to be in roundabouts, which I know is something that, love them or hate them, are probably coming your way or already being developed in your community. And they're really wonderful spaces for art projects. I mean, I think even with highway overpasses and things like that, now I know that that can become, you know, that's where, in terms of implementation, a lot of collaboration has to happen. But again, these are the kinds of projects that people say, hey, you know, you're in Meridian when you see the wonderful, colorful piece of artwork. So transitioning now to Creative City and strategies specific to that. I really like the idea of public art projects that can actually, that people can participate in. And, you know, we think of these projects as being guided by artists, but where volunteers can come and help paint a crosswalk, or can submit a poem that can be stamped into a sidewalk, or can come down for a day and help make a drawing using birdseed. The kinds of things where people can actually sort of roll up their sleeves, meet with an artist, get to sort of put their, you know, put their own hand into the art making. So there was a lot, and we'll talk about, I've got a sort of space in the presentation where I want to talk about this some more, but there was a really strong interest in the survey and this idea of supporting local artists and art making. And then as we started to talk to folks in the interview process, it became clear that there are probably a small handful of artists locally, Meridian, or regionally, that have experience doing large scale sculptural pieces that are permanent in public space. Although there might be artists that are interested in growing into that practice, it may be a strategy to think about, to say, you know, maybe we need to cater some of our projects to the strengths of our local artists. And I think your electrical boxes do that to a certain extent, but there might be other kinds of things. The project on the left is actually a project in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, called Stick 'em Up. And it's a wheat paste festival that they have every year, where artists throughout their downtown create these sort of wheat paste, you know, temporary pieces throughout their downtown. Things like pavement painting projects. Again, even thinking about posters, two-dimensional work, graphic designers, like the project on the right, writers, authors. Is there a tradition of you know, poetry or writing in the community? Well, that can be public art as well. So thinking about that in terms of projects that play to the strength of local artists. Again, if you're interested in local artists, you know, are there programs that can be developed to support artists that are new to the public art field? Mentorships, training programs, and things like that. And maybe, again, those might be partnership projects that you have with some of your neighboring communities or universities or colleges. And then I think this is finally on Creative City. You know, again, thinking about Meridian as a creative place is one of the strategies to really have a unique and diverse collection with a wide range of different types of artists. So again, artists that create traditional sculpture, that create temporary interventions, that create things that are functional, that do small scale surprises, that work in text, you know, to sort of really have this sort of, instead of thinking, you know, we want to curate a collection that all feels like it's you know, like we're all doing all bronze representational work, or it's all sort of a piece. Think about a collection that's eclectic and diverse and sort of engages artists in different kinds of ways.
Where is that umbrella project?
You know, I wish I know. There's some wonderful umbrella projects that have been done in alleyways, and I was going to include that one, but this is such a favorite of mine. And I think it was just a little guerrilla project that was done by an artist. I've had this image in my database forever. But there's a wonderful project that was just done in Coral Gables, Florida, where they hung the sort of umbrellas. It was over a sort of sidewalk dining area, and it's absolutely stunning. So again, a temporary piece, actually not a very a very expensive project for what it was, but really stunning. And then finally, active and attractive. So, you know, again, thinking about strategies, how do we do those? You know, one thing is to really make that commitment, for the city to really make that commitment. Then when the city is building a high profile public facing facility or public space, that there's always that commitment to include public art. A lot of communities accomplish that through Percent for Art, which we can talk a little bit about in the future, but there are other ways of doing that as well. And I think the piece on the right, and I will get you the information on that. This is a project in Arkansas, but I believe the artist on that project on the right is from Idaho. Again, functional elements. So when the city is engaged in developing something like a streetscape or a bus waiting area or wayfinding, can art be a part of that? Something to think about is a role for the commission, which, you know, may not be part of your sort of bylaws right now, but is there an advocacy role for this group? And not just advocating for the arts, but I think an important aspect of public art is also having really well designed public spaces. That the best art in the world can't fix a poorly designed public space. So the advocacy for great public spaces or public places needs to go hand in hand with having good public art. And that's a mosaic project, by the way. It's one of my favorites, is by a Recite Studio. And I think this is in the Houston area. Developers, we'll talk about this in a minute too. So this could be another strategy, and another role for the commission is looking at different ways to either encourage or require developers to incorporate public art into their own projects. And then being a resource. So are there guides, websites, workshops, you know, participating in things that the chamber is doing, anything that you can do, again, just to provide those resources for people who are potentially interested in doing public art on their own, but just need a little bit of help. And these are a couple of different guides. The one on the left is one that we worked on for the city of Nashville, which was a guide to mural making. It's actually a great resource, and it's not, there are only very, very few parts of it that are Nashville specific. It's something that if you're interested in that, I would encourage you. And then the Places of Possibility is another one from Jackson Hole, which has a fantastic emerging program. And again, sort of not just thinking about public art, but creating great public places. So, and you have the sheet in front of you, but any thoughts on some of these strategies, things that you think jump to the top of your list of things that you think would be important for you all to focus on, things that you think are terrible ideas, things that you are missing that you think we should incorporate or include?
If I might jump in quickly, and this is from a long professional history in engineering, not engineering, but architecture and design. Mm-hmm. I personally think the single most potentially impactful thing of all of the things you talked about is getting developers to incorporate good art in their spaces. Not necessarily for every housing new community with a name that, possibly though, because they all have these kind of gated entrances, maybe there, but getting developers really on board. I know they were in California, as a matter of fact, when a developer was going to do a public building, or any kind of building for that matter, there was a required set aside for public art, 1%, 2%, whatever it was. But there is some amazing art in buildings, in buildings or around buildings or at buildings in California because it was mandated. Now there is some incredible junk public art too, like the 15-foot tall bunny that's in Beverly Hills. It's the most ridiculous looking thing you've ever seen in your life. But so again, I think just developers' requirement for public art.
Mhm. Tom?
I'd like to add to that. I agree. And I think I'd like to see the commission, our commission, develop some criteria and standards so developers, that there's a thematic through line to the approach of our entire city. And I think, Meredith, what you were saying about identity, this might be an opportunity for us to put some effort into identity. If there's a thematic through line of the design criteria or elements that must be included in these developers' locations. For this conversation, X, Y, and Z, it has to include an agricultural element, it has to include a technology element. And I'm not suggesting that that's the identity of Meridian, but then that developer or that public art, it could be unique for the Tuscany subdivision would have their version of that thematic through line. The new ones that are developing in South Meridian, they would have their application to that thematic through line, again, giving a cohesive approach to the entire city. And what I think one of the things that's kind of fun that could be explored in the development of that type of art is it doesn't have to be in our face. You know, it could be the hidden Mickey version. Forgive me for putting on my ears for a second, but it's one of the backstories that has driven an incredible amount of design, has informed quite a bit of design on what we did do. And there's just hidden Mickeys everywhere. You have to look for them, but they are incorporated into the specific different lands. And I think Meredith, you pointed out that it was districts. So our different districts within the city have their own identity, but yet there's a cohesive tie into the entire footprint.
So one of the slides that I have coming up is to talk specifically about public art and private development, but I'll just share this. So one of the things we learned from Caleb Hood, who is the city's, I'm going to forget his title, but he's in the planning department. One of the things we learned in talking to him is that the development code has certain open space and site amenity requirements for developers in it. And I think this is, again, something to follow up on. That open space and site amenity requirement already provides developers with the option of commissioning public art to satisfy that requirement by the city. So there's a list of quality of life amenities that they can choose from: clubhouse, fitness facility, bike storage, public art, picnic area, and then additional open space, I think. And there's formulas for all of that. So I think the good news is that that is already part of the city's code. It's already baked into the DNA. I think the bad news of that is that even though it's already there, it has not been really marketed, or developers haven't been encouraged to take advantage of that and sort of their site amenity, or maybe don't see the benefit of doing it or things like that. So I think there's getting it into the code, and then there's really almost like a campaign to work, to really encourage developers to see the potential and the opportunity of doing it. And I think you're absolutely right. Having those criteria and standards that that this body, that the commission develops, and that there's some sort of review also in order to ensure that the developers meeting sort of the intention of that is important. So, you know, and I think this also, you know, a lot of we'll talk a little bit about the funding piece as well. I mean, you know, the public art program currently receives $50,000 a year from the city, or it's capped. The funding is capped at 50,000. So there's only really, at least with the current funding that you have right now, there's only so much you can do. So really thinking about developers as allies and partners is a good way to start thinking about being able to do more than you currently are able to within the confines. Although I think developers will also want to know, what's the city doing? You know, if we're going to do it, the city should be doing it too. So that's encouraging to hear. Any other thoughts on strategies? Okay. And we can share that language with you from the code. Audrey has it, and I'm sure, and you know, we just have the excerpt from the code, so I'm not sure if it applies across the board to different, you know, all zoning categories, or if it's just specific to certain types of zoning areas. So I think there's a little bit more fact finding to do with Caleb and to get more on that. All right, let me go back to share screen. All right, are we back? Can you see the screen?
Yep.
Not? Yes. Okay. Not. Okay. Uh-oh. Can I forward the screen? Let's see. Well, let's transition and hold on to those thoughts. I mean, and again, you know, we'll go through some more, and I'm sure you'll have other ideas that come up as we're moving through. So the next thing we started to focus on was implementation, and I wanted to share with you before we dug into this some of the observations that we had about some of your strengths and challenges as it comes to implementation. So your strengths: you have an existing funding ordinance established by the city. You have Audrey, an experienced staff person. Although she does more than just public art, it's fantastic that you've got her there to do a lot of the work. You've got the Arts Commission, the Public Arts Subcommittee in place with a really nice sort of broad portfolio of expertise. You have a supportive mayor and council thus far, and good relationships with other city departments. You know, public art programs, in terms of where they live in the city org chart, it differs from community to community, and there's no sort of there's no best practice on this necessarily. We've worked with public art programs that are in the economic development department. We've worked with public art programs that are embedded in the parks department. I've worked with public art programs that are sort of in the city manager's office. You know, so sometimes they live in public work. So it really just depends on sort of how this you know, how those departments are structured. Sometimes it depends on the leadership within those departments. I think being in parks right now is seems like a good place, because you do so many projects with parks, and because you've got a lot of support there from the staff. You do have a track record of successful projects. You already have an established method for developing annual work plans. It seems very clear, and you already have this option for developers already baked into the code, right? So these are all great strengths in terms of implementation. Your challenges: although you do have a funding source, that funding is very limited. You know, some of the projects that we shared in that first slideshow, you'd have to save up for 7 years before you'd be able to commission any of those projects with a $50,000 a year budget. You do, although you have staff, the staff, as I mentioned, has other responsibilities. I think one of the reasons we were asked to do this was to sort of help develop this stronger vision for public art, to really focus the program on what it is, you know, what it is, or how, again, that impact and community. One of the things that we want to work with you all to think a little bit about is a criteria for identifying and prioritizing your public art opportunities as well. So, there's there's a sort of an infinite number of public art opportunities that that you have in front of you. So how do you decide? Um, right now there are some practices that you have in place for commissioning public art, but nothing that's really sort of baked into a set of guidelines. And the selection processes, as far as they've sort of been explained to me, described to me, don't necessarily follow best practices, and potentially haven't been attracting some of the best artists for those projects, probably because of how the calls have been structured a little bit. We have some local artists, but they don't necessarily have a tremendous amount of experience with public art. You do, as it again has been sort of explained to me, have a small handful of artists that are getting the larger commissions. So you're sort of developing a collection that has artists, the same artists doing multiple projects. Although you've got sort of this nice track record and good relationships with other departments, other city departments, we also got the sense that in these conversations that within these other city departments that the Arts Commission and the Public Art Subcommittee and the Public Art Program itself aren't necessarily on their radar. And so they might sort of start doing things on their own without thinking about, oh, the city has a program and there's a process and there's a commission already in place to sort of work with on these kinds of things. Getting sort of in the weeds, it became clear as we were talking with some of the folks that you've partnered on with projects that the public art program, the staff, and the public art subcommittee aren't always involved with defining sort of the scope for public art projects. That, for example, within a park, that the location might be predetermined by the Parks Department or by the landscape architect that's designing the park. The goals for artwork might be also predetermined, so that it's sort of coming to you all and you're reacting instead of sort of being proactive and defining that scope for the projects. You have that private development option, but it's not being utilized. And then we'll talk about, this is actually what I'm going to talk about first, is just the lack of identity for the city's program itself. So I have a sort of list of recommendations. The first one is thinking about actually having some identity for Meridian's public art program. And I put Meridian Art in Public Spaces there because that's what it's actually referred to in the city's ordinance. Maybe that's what you keep. Maybe you call it Meridian Public Art. Maybe you call it Meridian's Public Art Program. But whatever it is, I think having a name and an identity, it doesn't necessarily need to be a logo or brand, but whatever that name is should be used consistently. It should be used capitalized, and I think that's for both internal and external purposes. That having that identity when you're working with your internal partners. Oh yeah, this is a public art project. We need to talk to the city's the city has a public art program. We need to talk to them. Or for external partners, to sort of recognize that this is a thing. And I just put a couple of examples of logos of public art programs and other communities, again, that sort of have their own sort of name. Las Cruces Public Art, I like, and Public Art San Antonio's PASA, ACT Public Art, that's Providence, Rhode Island, and it's the City of Arts, Culture, and Tourism. So it's the public art program under the Department of Arts, Culture, and Tourism. So these are just some examples of that. I think a nuance to this is not only having that name or identity, but then really this commitment within the city that this public art program, whatever it's called, should be the umbrella in which all of the city's public art activities take place. So that if another city department is interested in commissioning public art, they work with the program to manage that project. I don't know that this has been a huge issue, but I could see something emerging where, where planning decides that they want to do something around doing traffic calming in downtown, and they might engage an artist to do a project here, or you know, this tends to happen sometimes when there isn't that sort of strong identity of the city's public art program in place. The next set of recommendations really have to do, so we're sort of going big picture to smaller, to like finer grain, right? So planning. So I think you're actually doing pretty well in this regard, but these are just things to remember. So one is when the city's developing a citywide plan, district plans, area plans, that public art and the public art program, meaning the staff, the public art subcommittee, and the commission, should be engaged in thinking about the role of public art in these districts or citywide, and that should be called out in the plan. And there are a couple of reasons for this. One is that it ties into this the conversation we were having earlier about private development. So if an area, let's say there's a new hospital coming to Meridian, and the place where the hospital is being developed and the intersection that's going to be the major intersection is a priority area identified in the plan for public art, then when that developer comes in to do that project, that gives the city sort of a signal like, oh, remember that our plan for this district said this isn't a priority place for public art. We should engage the developer, the hospital, or you know, whoever's coming in to have that conversation about public art. So it's important when talking with different partners. It's also important for internal departments as they start to sort of take on projects as the city continues to sort of grow and read, and as well as redevelop, that signals to them, oh, public art is part of this. I should go talk to the public art program. Right now, the public art program has been, or I guess it has traditionally done, annual planning, which again I think is one of the strengths that you have in place. And it's been a 1-year plan with a 5-year look ahead. And you know, our recommendation is to keep doing that. You know, that this would be a collaborative, that staff would sort of collect information about potential opportunities, as well as other program needs, if they're programmatic things or conservation needs or maintenance needs, and then the public arts subcommittee would evaluate those based on a set of criteria. And that criteria would be something that I think you would develop collaboratively. And I had a couple notes on this. I mean, and I think that, again, this gets into, you know, in the sort of infinite world of public art opportunities there might be out there, how do you, you know, in the limited funding resource environment, how do you decide what you're going to do? And, you know, I think those criteria probably include a handful of things. One would be around mission alignment or vision alignment. One would be around sort of, is this really going to lend itself to a great art opportunity? So those are sort of artistic criteria. There's probably some locational criteria. And then there's also just feasibility. So, you know, I think that annual planning process is something that would just get baked into the work of the committee, and that would potentially get approved by the commission as well. And then finally on planning, and we'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I don't know that it's a best practice, but it might be like a via partnership best practice, is that we really think it's helpful when you're starting a new public art project to do a plan for that project. And, you know, that plan would include where, it would include the goals for the project, the budget, the funding source, the anticipated timeline, what your artist selection process is going to look like, maybe who's involved with your jury or committee, who the different partners are, who the stakeholders are, et cetera. And that you develop that gets input from the different stakeholders and city departments you're going to have to partner with to do that project. And then that document would then be approved potentially by the public arts subcommittee. And I think that's something you'll need to decide. Does that get approved by the Arts Commission? Does that get approved by reinforcements? Does that get improved by city council? But what I like about having a project plan is it forces you to think through the entire project ahead of time. It gets everybody on board so that, it's sort of like a speak now or forever hold your peace, in terms of the project. And I think especially if the project has to go through a series of approvals, if it has to go to the Parks Commission, if it has to go to City Council, that they're not hearing about the project for the first time, or the last thing you ever want to have happen from experience is to be taking a project to City Council and have them say, well, why wasn't so and so on the artist selection committee? Or why did you decide to have this project focus on agriculture and not on technology? Because they will have already had a chance to sort of see what you're planning on doing, and then all they're really doing is confirming that you did what you said you were going to do. So again, this is just something that we always do when we commission public art. So I want to talk about, so again, we're going from sort of general to specific. I'd like to talk about the project management process, so commissioning public art. And as I said in the strengths and weaknesses, there were a few things that we noticed in your process that we wanted to sort of talk with you about. So one is, and these are some key ideas. And one is that we really feel like it's a best practice, or it is a best practice. And we really feel like in future projects that the focus should be on a qualifications-based selection process. So what that means is when you are putting out a call for artists, you're not asking artists to submit a design, at least at that first stage. You're asking artists just to submit a letter of interest and their portfolio, and then you're selecting finalists based upon their qualifications, not based on a design. And the reason for that is if there are a couple of I'd say I'll focus on the two main reasons for that. One is that the creative part, that's the artist's currency. That's what they make their living on. And so to ask artists to give away their creative product for free really undervalues the artist. The second reason, which is a little bit more pragmatic, is that and I think this relates somehow to your vision as well, is that you are looking for artists to create work about Meridian for you, specifically for you. And in order to do that, unless the artist is hyper local, you're going to want an artist to come in and learn about your community and learn about the park or the downtown or the intersection or the neighborhood or the district where they're creating work, and what makes it special, what makes it unique, and what does the site look like, and how are people going to be experiencing it, and what are the sight lines, and all of these things before they start sketching a design. So that's why we in the field really sort of feels very strongly about qualifications-based selection. So that's a two-step process. So that first step is qualifications. Now, let's say you pick 3 finalists and you really do kind of want to see designs. Well, then you pay 3 finalists to put together a design. So that would be step 2. So maybe you get 30 submissions, you narrow it down to 3, and then you invite those 3 to put their proposals together and you pay them for it. I think any process really needs to have clear roles for the public arts subcommittee, for the arts commission, for staff, and if there's a role for the mayor and council, and have that all written out and crystal clear. You also really need to make space for technical review in that process. And then finally, and I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, having options for an open call or an invitational. Did someone want to ask a question? I've been hiding your faces.
When you say technical review, does that include legal review, like for the wording of an RFP or an RFQ or whatever it is?
No, what I guess what I'm thinking more about in there, although there might be some of that that needs to happen, is once an artist has, I guess, at the different stages of design. So, you know, if you think about it, and you're speaking sort of borrowing the language of architecture at the conceptual design, schematic design, and final design stages of an artist's design, if the project lends itself to that, that you might want to have, you know, the city staff, you might need to, you know, have other folks involved with, you know, if it's part of a park where you already have a landscape architect or an engineer engaged,
Engineer.
you're going to want to, you know, you're going to want to have all that done. And then, you know, the artist, especially if they're building something complicated, is going to have drawings engineered. And so that, you know, you're going to need to have somebody who can actually review those engineered drawings and, you know, make sure that they're the real deal. So just baking that into your process, though, and knowing that that's something that you're going to need to do. And I like to do an early technical review before the project goes actually to the, you know, to like the public arts subcommittee or the arts commission or mayor council, because I don't want to show them anything that, you know, that the staff doesn't think can get built, or that is going to be, you know, that there's a power line in the way, that there's no way we could build something that tall. You know, you don't want to start getting people excited about an idea that's not technically feasible. So I'm going to zip through these really quickly. I put this on your handout also. And one of the things, and I don't want to try to do it in this meeting, but I put a column on your handout on the right hand side that's just blank, because what I didn't do is as I started to outline this process was to say whose responsibility it is at each step. And I think that's an important task that you're going to need to sort of work through. And I will say, I mean, there's some things that might be very obvious, but in my experience, some of the who is very dependent on the city and the sort of decision-making structures that you already have in place, you know, for these kinds of projects. So again, that first step is just defining the art opportunity. This is the project plan that I already described. The next step is forming that art selection panel. So if it's not the public art subcommittee that's serving as its selection panel, oh, I lost my screen. All right. If it's not the public art committee that's serving as its selection panel, then you know, who is going to be on that group, and get them together and get them oriented to the project. Where am I? Select the artist. So this is where, again, we talked about the qualifications-based selection process. You know, usually for me, when I do an RFQ, I ask for a cover letter, a 3-page resume, because some artists will send you their 12-page resume and it will kill you to look through all of it. And so they should always have a shorter resume. Usually somewhere between 8 and 15 images of their complete, you know, previous work, and a list that tells you what you're looking at, and then names and contact information of references. That jury reviews the qualifications and then recommends finalists, and then those finalists get engaged. And so there are a couple of options. I sort of described earlier, paying finalists to develop and present a concept. Another option is just to interview those finalists and pick one, and commit to working with that artist and just work with them through the process. And it kind of depends on the kind of project it is, and whether or not you feel as a jury or committee that that's something that you feel comfortable doing. And then the artist selection gets approved. Executing the artist agreement. Can't forget about that. It always takes twice as long as you think it will. Approving the artist concept. So that's again, so if the artist is selected in an interview and you don't already have their concept through that paid proposal process, you're going to want to take that back to your selection panel or jury. And then it really turns into a staff project management, technical review, inspecting the work at Fabrication, overseeing installation, and then maintenance and conservation. So there's a lot of work for the jury, the committee, the commission up front. And then sort of as that concept is approved, typically those projects shift into staff really having to work to stay on top of things and only bringing it back if there's some sort of change in the project.
Meredith,
Mm-hmm.
this is Tom. Could you go to your participant screen, please?
Mm-hmm.
Some people were raising their hands.
Oh, sorry. Here. Oh. Okay. Hi. Oh, and you're muted.
I can hear and see you, but I'm not sure everybody can.
Oh, okay.
I can hear and see you.
Okay. Jennifer, were you wanting to say something? I think you're on mute.
You're muted, Jennifer.
I wonder if I can unmute her. No. We'll do like we did. I tried to do a Zoom call with my 84-year-old father, and he had he couldn't hear us, but we could hear him, and then he had the TV on, and so I finally like started writing notes on a piece of paper and holding it up to the screen. Anyway, Jennifer, can you unmute? Do you see how to do that? No, I won't do it. Can you text? There's an option, isn't there, to text questions? Do we have that available? Oh, I'm sorry.
Jennifer, are you trying to use your...
We went for help. Fantastic. Thank you, Natalie. Does anybody else have any questions while we're waiting for Audrey to help us with our tech?
I'm just going to jump in. I am very, very familiar in past years with the process by which finalists for usually very, very large architectural projects are paid for their time and materials and whatever to do models and stuff like that. But I think for our purposes, my feeling would be that two-dimensional work, like say a mural, versus three-dimensional, like a major sculpture in an intersection, they're kind of apples and oranges. I don't think we have to have just one approach, but I would make the selection of the finalist vary. You know, maybe we pay, maybe we don't, but just make it project specific, not just, okay, this is the way we do it.
Mm-hmm.
So if I can just jump in real fast, and then I see that Tom wants to speak, but I'll just jump in on that process because I've been a part of it. In the past, we have done an RFQ that basically we had a number of artists that were sort of, I forget what we called it, but a number of artists that we could call on without having to do a wider call. So they had already
like a roster. We had a roster.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a roster. And so the pieces that were selected for Champion Park and Renaissance Park were selected from that roster, but we did have folks, we did pay them to come up with an idea and do a little mock-up and have a presentation. So we didn't, say, this is who we want to work with and we'll develop an idea from there. We had them come to us with ideas already, but we did pay them for that. So we have done that in the past, but it's not something that we do regularly. So this is good feedback for, good food for thought for how we want to move forward. So I'll shut up now and I'll let Tom ask his.
Building off of that, you answered it a bit. Meredith, up to this point, the recommendations that you're making, for those of us who are new to the commission, do they not currently exist? Did they exist in the past and just have not been implemented? I'm just trying to educate myself on what we currently have.
As far as I know, and please correct me, everybody, if I'm wrong about this, that there have been different methods that have been used to select artists, but there haven't been any sort of, there are no guidelines in place that the staff, the commission, the public arts subcommittee, and the city at large have sort of agreed on as this is our process.
Madam Chair, this is Emily. Meredith, I'm the attorney for the Arts Commission. Hi, I think I might actually be the person who's been around the longest, which is weird, but to give some context, the Arts Commission did adopt an accession and deaccession policy earlier this year that kind of touches on this, but it really does describe more of an ad hoc process than adopting a kind of standardized process. Early on in the Arts Commission's inception, so their first public arts projects they did follow this sort of classic model, and it took a long time, of course, but they were really successful, and it was really a true public art project. I think the length of time that it took to do that, especially when you build in the bureaucracy of government, really frustrated people. So there was almost a movement to speed up the process and, implement art projects more quickly. I don't know that that's been necessarily to our benefit. We've gotten lucky a few times and unlucky a few times. The parks kind of roster that Jessica described is that has been an initiative of the Parks Department, largely to get things done quickly and have someone at the ready to not necessarily circumvent, but just sort of be a takeoff on the two-step process that you described. So I'm chiming in to say we have done it and it was great. And I wish we would always do it that way, but maybe manage expectations ahead of time as far as how long it will take to do it.
Liz, I hear what you're saying about building in flexibility. I mean, I do think having agreed upon guidelines that you're consistently using is helpful, but building into those guidelines flexibility for different types of projects also makes a lot of sense.
And if I could add, thank you, Emily, for providing some history on that. It's weird to think that you have been around the longest. You were here before I got here, and I'm now one of the older commissioners. I want to note that with the parks roster that we had, I think there were 3 artists on that roster, and they tend to work with each other anyway. So, which is great, but I think that speaks to something that we've talked about before and that you touched on, which is a lack of diversity of public art and a lack of we're just not engaging enough folks in the process. If we only have a few artists who respond every time and work with each other, it kind of leads us down a path of having the same kinds of art every time. So that's something that we'll talk about as part of this process. So it's good that we're having these discussions now.
Jennifer, are you verbal now? Are you? Oh no, Bonnie too. No.
And can somebody else try to unmute Jennifer? Because on my screen, it shows with a little microphone with a little line through it.
Yeah. I think sometimes the meeting organizer can unmute other people. Oh, Jennifer, you're unmuted. Try saying something. Jennifer, can you say something? No.
Oh.
So weird. I guess because they're at City Hall and using the tech there, it's a internal technology problem.
Jennifer, is your microphone unmuted as well?
It's scheduled to be replaced. It's been amazing what they have made work, but it really is not built for this, the hybrid system.
I know. You know, this past few months, I mean, it have been so challenging for everybody, but I mean, this is sort of a miracle that we're able to meet like this. And so when these technology things happen, I have to always sort of remind myself that we're living in the future.
Exactly.
Is there no chat function that's available? It doesn't look like there is.
It looks like it might be disabled, perhaps because we're live on YouTube.
Oh.
Is there a way to text your questions or email them to Jessica?
Yeah, if I think everyone should have my email address. So if folks who are at City Hall aren't able to, if we can't hear you, you're welcome to email it to me and I'll read it out.
Tom?
Another option could be if they use their personal cell phones, they can dial into the meeting link. This happens often. So
yeah,
we have your visual and you use your personal cell phone to dial into the meeting link, and we hear audio through your cell phone and the video through.
That's right. And I think that's on the meeting invite. All right, while you all are working on that, I think I'm almost through the presentation. We'll let Jennifer dial. Let me see if I can run through these next few slides really quickly. Can you see my screen again or no?
No.
Hold on. Oh. Everybody. Well, no, here. I'll go. Wait, there. They're connecting. Bonnie, are you there? All right, you're muted again on your phone. If you unmute on your phone.
I'm unmuted.
We gotcha.
Okay, so I have no idea what we missed.
Have you not been able to hear either?
I can hear you now.
Okay. Oh, I'm so sorry.
How about now?
Okay. I'm the one that ends in 948.
All right, we can hear you, Jennifer. All right, did you all have questions or were you just not able to hear?
I just wasn't able to hear.
Okay. Why don't we keep moving? What we will need you to do is mute while I'm talking and then unmute when you have a question, because we're getting a really funky echo. It's fun. And I'm like, we've got two angles on some of you too, which is kind of fun. All right, let me get through these last few slides, and then we can go back with, if there are things that we missed that you want to talk about, we can go back. Let me see. All right, can you see my screen?
Yep.
All right, this is just and again, we'll share these slides with you so that you have them. So don't worry about taking notes or capturing screens. I guess one other thing to think about is open competition versus limited competition. And I'm glad you brought up the roster too, because I think this fits into this. So really the question is sort of, how do we develop our artist pool? Open competition is the standard way of doing that. So you issue an RFQ, you advertise it broadly. A lot of cities sort of require this. Some cities have options for doing other types of competitions. What this open competition does is it allows anybody that's interested to be able to apply. The downside is that it can be very time consuming. I have done open calls within the past 18 months where I have received over 200 submissions. It can be brutal to get through all of that. A lot of those artists aren't qualified. And there are some artists that are sort of at a certain point in their career where they just don't respond to those open competitions anymore because they don't have to. So I think especially if you're looking to sort of find an artist who has a specific skill set, or who is working at a certain level, sometimes those open competitions can be not the best. A limited competition is where you develop a short list, and you just invite a short list of artists. It's less time consuming. Oftentimes you can pinpoint specific artists. I feel like this is also a way to attract artists that don't typically apply for public art projects. And it can be a useful tool to have. So again, I think in terms of flexibility, this is something you should explore to see if doing limited competitions is a tool that you all can have in your toolbox. I think same with a roster. A roster, I feel like, is only useful if you're going to be doing a lot of projects over a short period of time. We're working with a client right now to put together a roster specifically for mural projects because they know they're going to be commissioning about a half a dozen murals over the next 18 months. So they don't want to have to put out a call every time they do a mural. So as I mentioned in the survey results, and it's sort of reflected in the vision statement as well, there was this sort of a thread that appeared in the sort of research around wanting to focus on supporting local artists and commissioning work from local artists. And so I wanted to ask some questions about that to you all. And I think the question, I'm just figure out how to frame the question. I think the question is about, is the interest in sort of building and supporting a local creative economy, a local creative community, sort of creating Meridian as a place that supports artists? Or is the goal around that about creating a body of work at Meridian that's informed by this sense of what Meridian is all about, a sense of local, people that get you? Is the focus on focusing on local artists to ensure that the artwork sort of reflects something that's very authentic to this place, or is it something else? That's my question. I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that. Or do you not care if it's local or not?
Well, Meridian does support local artists. I mean, Initial Point Gallery is certainly local centric, if there is such a term.
Tom?
Does the team,
Madam Chair, Commissioners, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
that might be answered through the RFQ process? Perhaps, because obviously I feel we wouldn't want to eliminate any of the local artists if they have skill sets and visions that are comparable to other artists in the region, or albeit regional or around the supporting states or anywhere, or perhaps internationally. But could that, let me ask the question, could that be answered through the RFQ process?
Yes. I think what threw me is that this idea of supporting local artists came through very loud and clear in the survey. But then as I started to have conversations about, okay, so who are these local artists and how do I talk to them and where do I meet them and who's making public art? And, you know, it was sort of like, well, so I thought, well, maybe there's a different, maybe the way that people were answering that question wasn't necessarily about building an art community in Meridian, but maybe it was more about this sort of the second idea that I sort of hypothesized, which is more about that sort of creating a collection that feels authentic to Meridian. And I think that Tom, that could be to in response to your comment, could be come through that RFQ process, because there are artists that it's, you know, I think artists, especially that are experienced creating public art, where, you know, the thing that excites them the most is getting to know your community and creating something that feels very authentic to your community. And so that RFQ process, if that's really what you want, you go through that RFQ process to find an artist for whom that's what their creative process looks like. And then you invite them to your community and they get to know you and hopefully are able to sort of tap into something that's very local and authentic. So the strategies we had put together, because I was hearing this strong local artists, I was thinking, well, okay, so mentorships and creating projects that play to local strengths and all of these things to sort of try to cultivate a homegrown public art sort of culture and community within the arts community. But which is not to say that that isn't something that you all could do, but I think I was sort of, I wasn't sure where you were on that.
Meredith, this is Jessica. I want to pose a question, I guess, to the other commissioners and get your thoughts about this, because I think Meredith is right. For those of you who are new, we can share all those survey results with you. There was a lot of, Meredith is right, there was a lot of support for local artists. Do you all think that perhaps that is a reflection of the community's concerns? You know, there's a lot of concern in the Treasure Valley about folks moving here from other places and turning the Treasure Valley into something that is not authentic to its roots or to its location, but rather is sort of a copy of other places. Do you think that perhaps this interest in supporting local artists is kind of connected to that, where there's a concern that if we bring in other artists from other places, that that they're going to try and turn Meridian into something inauthentic to Idaho and to the Treasure Valley?
Definitely. Very good point. I don't want to live personally in Beverly Hills North.
So, oh, go ahead, Tom.
Agreed, but this, in the industry I work in, this is just part of our selection process. And the selection process takes into consideration someone who has a strong discovery phase in their development. And once whether that is a local artist or whether it is someone from outside of the area, part of what we, I think, as the people who choose who the artist will be, have to have a clear understanding of their process, their phasing process. And if part of their phasing process is not the discovery of who we are as Meridians, our sense and sensibilities, then we could end up with being Beverly Hills North, and that's not what we want. We want something that's unique and true to our identity. And if that artist is not prepared to embrace that, then they're not they don't go into the selection pool.
Well stated.
Okay. I think the other thing to remember, it is about the artist's creative process. I think the other thing to remember when I work with artists is that the art world is a global beast, and an artist who is based in New York or is based in LA or is based in Denver or Chicago, they're probably not from there. They might be from St. Louis or Petoskey, Michigan, or Meridian, Idaho, or they may have moved around a lot, but their careers, because of how the art world works, their careers have sort of forced them to be nomads or to go to cities where, for lots of different reasons, they need to be in order to push their career forward. So that zip code, the address, is not always the best indicator of an artist's process, an artist's background, an artist's allegiances, an artist's sort of passions in terms of their art making. You have to sort of look at the whole package sometimes to really understand that as well. So,
Meredith, is there a way that you think we would be able to sort of educate the general public about the process when we put out these RFPs, or I mean, to sort of allay people's fears about an outside artist coming in?
So, because there's a perception issue that if we've got, I always think of that stupid old El Paso salsa.
New York City.
Right? Right. Yeah. I mean, I can't get that out of my head, but right. Right. You don't want the people to be like New York City. So, yeah, there probably is. I think there's some messaging. I mean, I think part of it too is, again, in my own experience, getting that artist, once you've selected them, out in front of people, meeting people, have them introduce them at a city council meeting, introduce that artist at a chamber of commerce meeting, have them, if they're creating a project for downtown, have them walk the streets and introduce themselves to business owners, because the artists will be able to really, if they're genuine and if they have a process that is very sort of, again, research based and engaged with the community, that will come forward right away. But there are probably other things that you can do. I would say the other thing I was gonna, and this is a question I thought you were gonna ask, but there are a couple of models out there that we can look at and share with you, where, like, El Paso, Texas, for example, has they've put together some criteria around, when do we try to focus on El Paso-based artists or Texas-based artists or Southwest-based artists or national artists, so that that they are thinking at the beginning of the project, you know, maybe this is an opportunity where we just want to focus on local or statewide or something like that, so that there is some balance and that you aren't sort of going in the other direction where all of a sudden you've got a collection where it's all artists from outside of the state. So that might be something to think about as well.
Just a quick throw in here. I don't know if any of you, Bonnie, you're probably familiar with the Betty Bowen Award, which is limited to artists from Washington, Idaho, and Oregon. And it's a huge, big to-do. And the artist chosen exhibits at Seattle Art Museum, and it's just a big, huge thing. It's a $15,000 first prize. But there's nothing that says that we can't limit it, you know, maybe by state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we just did a call for a community in Iowa, and then we limited it to artists from Iowa and the surrounding states. So, you know, that again, sort of, you know, it's not hyper regional, but it was sort of, we still, and it was also budget. There was budget considerations in that as well, but we wanted a Midwestern artist, and we also knew that the budget was limited enough that it would probably need to be somebody who wasn't coming from far away.
Yeah.
It sounds like I want to look into that. It's a Betty Bowen.
Betty Bowen, Bowen.
Okay.
It's a big deal.
Cool.
Madam Chair, Meredith, this is Emily again. So this is a question where the Arts Commission, they started here in 2005, and really that's, at least at the time, I don't know if this is still the case, but the number of artists doing at least big sculptures in Idaho or the Treasure Valley or even kind of regionally was pretty limited. So that did create this situation where there were, all the art in town was by 2 or 3 artists because that's who was here. So I think that's probably a data point that you need is what's the availability of local artists to do what you're doing, which is kind of to Tom's point, which is maybe it depends on what you're doing when it's appropriate.
Well, or again, or maybe you start to think about, if we do really want to support local artists, you know, are there a lot of furniture makers in Idaho? Maybe you create a project that's really geared towards people who make furniture. Are there is there a strong graphic design community? Maybe you create a project that focuses on graphic, but you know, but that kind of depends on what your priorities are.
Yeah, I mean, just because there are so many artists in the local area doesn't mean that they are public art related, do public art related work. You know, just because we might have 400 artists locally, I think there's few that are public art accomplished.
Very few.
This is also something I think it's worth engaging with your colleagues in Boise and elsewhere in the region to see how they're working through this issue. And, you know, there might be, you know, are they, do they know about artists that are interested in breaking into public art? And are there things that you can do to sort of support that as well? But,
you know, I think a lot of the artists that are looking for public art, I think the artists that are public art, I think the artists that are public art related, they follow the call to artists websites, and you know, look at those for the call to artists. You know, like there's the cafe, there's JAS, etc. And you know, I think you can, as a organization, you can limit your call to regional artists, local artists, or national.
mm-hmm.
And I think just that's a good way to reach out to a specific group of artists that, for instance, that do public art.
And Jessica, to
Mhm.
your point of making sure there's value in the community, regardless of where we source the artist from, I'm wondering if we have an opportunity to create ancillary value. For instance, and this, I forgive my ignorance, is there a mentorship program currently existing with any type of public artists that we've brought in? And if not, is that something we could consider, that if part of the criteria for the chosen artist is X amount of hours of mentorship with young artists or our next generation that within our community that we want to build, so that our community, our residents know that we still have a vision for our city. It's just perhaps the skill set or level experience isn't there yet. So we have to source it from somewhere else. But I think we might have an opportunity to create ancillary programs that are value to us.
I think it's a great idea. Yeah. And again, that's, I think, where you don't have to do it all on your own, right? We partner with the universities and partner with Boise and, other regional programs and tap into what they're already working on. All right. Well, in the interest of time, let's keep moving. Get back in share screen mode here if I can. That was really helpful, by the way, because that was sort of an idea that I was really struggling with. Funding. Oh, the funding. So, right now the program is mostly focused on permanent public art projects, and then you have the electrical boxes. I mean, something to think about is more temporary. It seems like there's some interest in that through the survey. I think also some interest within city government, programs to engage people in the collection. So once you have public art, are there lectures? Is there curriculum? Are there, I think your website has actually got highlights the collection nicely, but are there other ways to sort of engage people in the work? Programs to support local artist development, which we were just talking about, and then conservation, which we'll talk a little bit in a minute. But right now, conservation of public art doesn't come out of your $50,000 budget. I'm pretty sure, right? But it is something that has to get budgeted for every year. So, if you were interested in expanding your funding, a couple of ideas. One would be, even though you're getting $50,000 a year from the city through their general fund, perhaps individual city departments might be interested in setting aside funding from their budget, especially for new capital projects. So that doesn't preclude potentially the Parks Department to say, when they're putting the budget together for a brand new park, to say, we want to make sure that we've got public art in this park. We can put some money in the budget for it. There are grants, and I think having some of this vision and strategy will can be very helpful. There's Arts Idaho. Those are smaller grants, but I think absolutely ones you need to be pursuing. The National Endowment for the Arts has grants available every year that support public art, and then there are private foundations. And I think those are just things that especially the staff, Audrey, can keep sort of on her radar, staying connected to national public art networks and learning about those opportunities. For example, the Bloomberg Foundation nationally has public art. I don't know if you are in the Knight Foundation. I don't know if you're in what part of their sort of catchment area, but they have public art specific grants. Partnerships. Looking to Boise and other neighboring municipalities, to universities. I think, again, especially as you're thinking about programming, promotion, private development, we talked a little bit about. And at some point, you may want to think about revisiting the cap of $50,000 per year and or 50 cents a resident. So you're already if that $50,000 per year cap were not in place, I believe you would already be exceeding that with that 50 cents per resident amount. But that might be something, again, to think about revisiting, or again in the future, and potentially when you have sort of a few more successes under your belt, thinking about a completely new funding formula. Percent for art, which was discussed earlier, is one option to think about. Although I would say that there are some communities that are moving away from percent for art because it doesn't always generate funding in communities that are already built out. You guys are building, so that might actually be a great time to be thinking about percent for art. We work in one of the communities we work in quite a bit is Alexandria, Virginia. They do an annual allocation that's not based upon any kind of formula. But there are lots of different ways of thinking about that. But definitely, again, I think I said earlier, sort of offhand, but I mean, a couple of those projects that I showed at the beginning, especially the ones that were sort of at the highway scale, are projects that, given that $50,000 a year allocation, you would be, having to save up for multiple years in order to do those kinds of projects, if that's something you're interested in. So that might be just something to think about. And maybe those are special projects. Maybe those are one-off types of projects where you engage city council and the mayor, and they support doing a one-off type of project. Public art and private development, we also talked a little bit about too. I mean, there are two things. One is, are there guides, again, to help developers, organizations, and individual artists? I think for developers, sometimes the public art process or working with artists can be a little intimidating. And then the site amenity requirement I mentioned earlier, is that something that you can promote? And I think I would add to that, based on the earlier conversation, developing some criteria for private developers, that if they are doing public art, sort of what is the city's expectation of developers in terms of doing that. And then last but not least, your collection management. So this is a big part, and as your collection develops, will become, something that you'll really need to allocate resources to appropriately. So this first slide is actually just a little bit of a vocabulary slide. So in the field of public art, there's a difference between conservation and maintenance. So conservation is what is considered to be sort of the regularly scheduled examination, documentation, and treatment and preventive care of public art conducted by a professional art conservator. So this would be like the people who work in museums, who you see sort of touching up the paintings and waxing the bronzes and doing that kind of work that requires a specialist. But with public art, there's always just sort of the routine maintenance, the dusting, the washing, the power washing, if it's got moving parts, are we lubricating them? And those can often just be done by the city's regular maintenance staff. Maybe you give them special instructions, but it doesn't require any sort of professional training to be able to do. And so again, in order to maintain, have a well-maintained collection, that technical review is really important, so that you know what those conservation and maintenance needs are going to be before the artwork goes into the ground. Always, and I think you're already doing this, get maintenance worksheets from those artists. Conduct those regular condition assessments. And again, I think this is something that, Audrey, you've already been doing. Use professional conservators when needed. And then you've already got this great de-accession policy, which I don't think I have seen, but I will take a look at before we wrap up our work, to address the removal of artwork from a site if something happens to it that requires that sort of de-accession, so the removal of artwork from public view. And that was it. Here, I'm gonna close this. Hi. Any final thoughts, questions? So so our next step, we'll share this with you all. If you have any additional thoughts or questions, I think you can send those directly to Audrey or Jessica and they can get those to me. And then what we'll do is put all of this in a final report for you all in the next month or so. Any other thoughts or questions or things that you were hoping we would talk about today that we missed? Or
It was just an excellent presentation. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
It was extraordinarily well done.
Thank you so much, Meredith.
Thank you. I hope it was useful. I hope you were bored. I will. I'll PDF this, Jessica and Audrey, and get it to you tomorrow, so that you can share it with the commissioners and the committee subcommittee, so they can have it as part of the record of the meeting.
Thank you, Meredith. Sounds like there's an echo still. So for folks who are on the Public Arts Subcommittee, which seems to be pretty much all of you, our next step is to take all of this wonderful information that Meredith has put together and take the report that she's going to put together. And it's on us to actually write that public art plan. So we did not get funding to pay Meredith to do that. Although we can talk about how we want to raise some funding if we want to hire her back on to do the last step. So we have a subcommittee meeting next Thursday, and we can certainly talk more about all of this at that point. And I'm sure we'll talk about it at numerous other meetings as well. So this is sort of an ongoing conversation, but thank you again, Meredith, for all of your great work and your insight. And I sort of feel like we need another city staff member just to manage our public art program. Hint, hint. It sounds like we have a lot of, we have our work cut out for us, but it'll be worth it in the end because we will have a more formalized process and a more formalized identity as a program, and hopefully that will sort of feed on itself and will sort of snowball into being able to develop our program as we go. So thanks again. Does anyone have any other thoughts, comments, questions?
Well, I can't wait to meet all of you in person one of these days once this nasty pandemic is behind us. And yeah.
Okay, thank you again, Meredith and Jessica. Thank you for heading up the committee. And I guess that's the last item on the agenda. So at this time, if we don't, oh, the next meeting isn't until October 8th. Oh, that's the art week, because art week is consuming September. And so at this point, I guess we can adjourn if we have a motion.
Madam Vice Chair, I just have one question before we go. Are you or Audrey able to send out an update? So I think a lot of the other commissioners have been on multiple committees, so maybe they already know what's going on with Art Week, but I feel like I'm kind of out of the loop. So is there an update that you all are able to send out that's sort of, you know, an update from previous meetings or more information about what we're going to be doing for Art Week? I know it's going to be different this year, but it would be good to share that with everybody just so that we all kind of know what's going on and we can help spread the word.
So Audrey, do you have something to talk about for Art Week?
I'm not not connected to the audio at my computer. I can send out a update about Art Week next week. A lot of things will be finalized by next Monday. So I'll send out just a plan. The commissioners don't have a lot of responsibilities at this time because it is isolated in classrooms that are going to be run by instructors. I will reach out to the commissioners who signed up for our class with more information, and then I'll just send out a general email about Art Week.
That would be great. Thank you. Are we not doing the chalk art festival then?
We are.
Oh, we are. Okay. Cool.
Doing what?
Chalk art.
All right.
Okay,
well, that's good. I think it's a cool festival, so I'm glad to hear that we're still doing it. So, yeah, I will look forward to that update next week then. Thank you.
So if we have nothing else, then I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I don't know how, Madam Vice Chair, is that correct? I move we adjourn the meeting.
Second?
I second that.
I think Jennifer seconded that. All right, y'all, this is a little tedious, so have a great evening. Stay safe, wear your masks, wash your hands. The meeting is adjourned.
Bye, everyone.